The rain had a rhythm that night. Relentless, heavy, and angry. Drumming against rooftops like nature's war cry. Every few minutes, lightning split the sky, revealing the swollen creek at the back of the neighborhood, now more river than stream. Jake Lawson stood in his driveway, raincoat soaked through, muscles itching as he lifted another 50-pound sandbag into place. His hands were raw, his jeans clung to his legs, and the cold water pooled around his boots, but he kept stacking. He wasn't doing this for fun. He was doing it because he knew what was coming. The last storm, 2 months ago, had nearly drowned his garage. He'd spent weeks pulling out ruined insulation, hauling waterlogged boxes to the curb, and replacing flooring on weekends when the hardware store wasn't clean. He wasn't going through that again. The sandbags, dull, heavy, ugly things, were his last line of defense. A flash of lightning illuminated the street just long enough for him to see his reflection in the puddles, tired, wet, determined. Then came the voice that could make thunder sound polite. "Mr. Lawson." Jake groaned under his breath. Of course. He looked up to see Karen Strickland, chair of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, stomping toward him with her pink umbrella tilted against the rain. Even through the storm, her makeup was flawless. Not a single mascara streak, not a hair out of place. Her white sneakers, spotless as ever, seemed immune to the mud somehow, as if the elements knew better than to challenge her. "Evening, Karen," Jake said without enthusiasm. He kept stacking sandbags. "Evening," she repeated aghast. "Do you know what time it is?" Jake grunted as he adjusted the final bag in his front line. "Yeah, time to stop this water from ruining my house." Karen's mouth twisted. She pulled her clipboard out from under her arm and squinted at it through the rain. "You can't do this, Mr. Lawson. These things violate community guidelines. Section 4CD. Temporary outdoor installations that affect neighborhood aesthetics must be pre-approved by the HOA. Jake turned to her slowly, rain dripping from the brim of his hood. "Aesthetics. Karen, the creek's about to eat half the neighborhood. I don't think anyone's gonna care what it looks like when we're all swimming." Her lips pursed tighter. "We all agreed when we moved here to uphold a standard, Jake. It's about property value. Curb appeal. Consistency." "Consistency," he said, almost laughing. "You think this flood cares about consistency?" Karen ignored him, as she often did when confronted with logic. She stepped closer, poking the clipboard toward his wall of sandbags. "You didn't submit a request. You didn't notify the board. This eyesore could bring down the look of the entire street. You need to take it down immediately." Jake stared at her in disbelief. "If you want me to remove the only thing keeping my house from flooding because it's unapproved," she corrected crisply. He dropped the sandbag in his hands and straightened, water sloshing around his boots. "Karen, this isn't about the HOA anymore. It's about safety. I've got flood insurance quotes that say we're in a high-risk zone now. That creek's been rising faster every storm. If we get another 2 inches tonight, the street's going under. You can either help or get out of the way." Karen's expression softened. For about 3 seconds. "I understand your concern," she said in a voice that suggested she understood nothing at all. "But we can't make exceptions. Exceptions lead to chaos. If I let you have sandbags, then Mr. Simmons will want a tarp, and Mrs. Delaney will put up those hideous floodlights again. Before we know it, Willow Creek will look like a campground." Jake rubbed his temples. "It's already a swamp," she sniffed. "You're exaggerating." A low rumble echoed from the creek, like a beast clearing its throat. Both of them turned. Through the sheets of rain, they could see the water creeping up over the grass, devouring the manicured edge of the lawn. "Exaggerating, huh?" Jake said quietly. "Well, it hasn't reached the street yet." He laughed, a dry, bitter sound swallowed by the rain. "Not yet." She sighed, exasperated. "Look, Jake, I'm not trying to argue. I'm trying to maintain standards. If everyone starts ignoring the HO rules whenever there's bad weather, what's the point of having a community agreement at all?" "Maybe the point," he said, stepping closer. "Is to look out for each other, not to boss each other around." For the first time, Karen faltered. Her umbrella tilted, and a streak of lightning lit up her face. Uncertain, annoyed, but maybe a little scared. She wasn't used to being challenged. Especially not by Jake Lawson, the quiet guy who mowed his lawn at dawn and waved to everyone but rarely spoke. "I'll tell you what," he said finally, backing away and picking up another sandbag. "If this storm passes and I overreacted, I'll take every one of these down myself. But if it floods, you'll wish you'd listened." He opened her mouth to reply, but another thunderclap drowned her out. She shook her head, turned sharply, and stomped back toward her house, her umbrella nearly flipping inside out in the wind. Jake watched her go, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. By the time he finished his sandbag barrier, it was well past midnight. The rain didn't let up. The sound of rushing water behind the houses grew louder, more insistent. Jake stood under his porch staring at his handiwork. It wasn't perfect. The lines were uneven, and some bags sagged at the corners, but it was better than nothing. Inside, he peeled off his soaked jacket and boots, leaving a trail of mud on the entryway floor. His golden retriever, Max, patted over and sniffed the wet mess before flopping down with a sigh. Jake poured himself a cup of lukewarm coffee and stared out the window. Across the street, Karen's house was glowing with light. Through the rain-blurred glass, he could see her sitting on her couch, TV on, calm as if the world outside wasn't drowning. He muttered to himself, "Rules and standards, huh? Let's see how much those help when the creek breaks loose." When morning came, the rain had eased. Briefly, the street was littered with fallen branches and overflowing gutters. Jake stepped outside and felt his stomach drop. The sandbags were gone, every last one of them. A few muddy impressions remained where they'd been, but the barrier itself had vanished. And taped to his front door, held firm under a plastic cover, was a familiar white slip of paper. Notice of violati unauthorized outdoor installation. Immediate removal executive maintenance per section 4C. Further non-compliance will result in fines. At the bottom, in elegant cursive, Karen Strickland, HOA chair. Jake stood there for a long time. Rain dripping from his hair, staring at the notice. He didn't just smiled, a small, knowing smile that carried more warning than words ever could. "All right, Karen," he said softly, folding the notice and slipping it into his pocket. "Let's see who the rules protect when the water comes for everyone." The storm came with a wind. At first, it was only the wind, through the narrow streets and rattled the shutters. Then the rain followed thicker, faster, merciless. By 3 in the morning, the downpour was pounding like a waterfall, hammering rooftops and drowning the sound of sleep. Jake woke to the rumble of water, deep and constant, like a freight train running somewhere close but invisible. He sat up in bed, listening. Something was different this time. The rain had a rhythm before, steady, predictable. But this wasn't rhythm. This was chaos. He pulled on his jacket and stepped outside, barefoot on the porch. The air was heavy with that metallic smell that comes before disaster. Streetlights flickered in the mist, glowing like half-drowned fireflies. He could barely see past his own driveway. The world was a blur of gray. Then he heard it. The sound that made his chest tighten. The unmistakable rush of water where no water should be. He walked down the steps and looked toward the street. The creek that ran behind the neighborhood had broken free. What used to be a calm, narrow ribbon was now a furious brown current tearing through lawns and driveways. The water was already halfway up the curb, climbing fast. And right across the street, in the middle of it all, was Karen Strickland's pristine house. She had always kept it immaculate, white siding, trimmed hedges, a perfect brick walkway that curved toward her garage like a magazine photo. But now, the water was lapping against her steps. Her flower beds were gone, her lawn lights blinked underwater, and the current was beginning to swirl around the driveway like a predator circling prey. Jake ran to his truck and jumped inside, flicking on the headlights. The beams cut through the rain just enough to confirm his worst fear: the floodwater was moving faster than it should. He slammed the door open and shouted across the street, "Karen, you awake?" At first, there was no answer. Just the hiss of the storm. Then, faintly, a light flicked on in an upstairs window. A silhouette appeared, holding a phone. "Karen," Jake yelled again, waving his arms. "It's flooding. You need to move your car." She disappeared from view. For a few tense seconds, Jake didn't know if she'd heard him. Then he saw her front door burst open, and there she was. Rain fluffed, hair flying, phone pressed to her ear. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Jake muttered. She wasn't heading for safety. She was heading for her driveway. Even in the chaos, even with water rushing at her ankles, Karen's instincts went to the same place they always did, her possessions. And that possession, gleaming under the weak streetlight, was her pride. The white Bentley Continental GT, the $1 million trophy she'd bragged about at every HOA meeting. She sloshed through the water, heels sinking into mud, shouting into her phone, "Get the tow truck here now. It's an emergency." Jake yelled again, "Karen, forget the car. The road's not safe." She ignored him. The car's headlights blinked as she hit the key fob. She wrenched open the door and climbed in, her umbrella tumbling away into the flood. The engine roared to life, a sound of stubborn defiance against the roaring water. Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing. The current was already tugging at the wheels, swirling around the undercarriage. "Karen," he bellowed. "You'll get swept away." She rolled down the window just long enough to yell back, "I'm not leaving it. Do you know what this car costs?" Then she slammed the door and threw the car into reverse. The tires spun uselessly, flinging water into the air. The Bentley's rear end fishtailed, sliding toward the street. Jake stepped off his porch, rerun to her, but the water was knee-deep now and moving fast. "Karen, stop." But she didn't. The car lurched forward, engine whining, trying to climb against the current. It moved a few feet. Then the street collapsed beneath it. There was a sharp, metallic crack as the asphalt gave way, and the Bentley tilted nose first into the rushing flood. Karen screamed. The car was half submerged in seconds, water pouring over the hood. The headlights flickered once, the wet arc. Jake's heart raced. He waded into the water, fighting the pull of the current. "Karen!" He shouted again, slamming his boots into the muddy street, one step at a time. "Karen, get out of the car!" A current pushed against him like a wall. He grabbed a lamppost to steady himself, squinting through the rain. He could see her fumbling with the door, trying to push it open, but the pressure from outside held it shut. "Unlock it. Go through the window." She was panicking now, beating on the glass with her hands. The water rose higher. Jake's throat burned as he shouted over the roar. "Window. Now." Finally, she got it. The window lowered just enough for her to climb through. Jake waded closer, extending his arm. "Come on. You've got to jump." The flood surged again, and the car shifted, groaning as it was dragged another few feet down the street. "The curm grabbed my hand," he yelled. For 1 second, she did. Her fingers caught his, slippery and trembling. Her eyes, terrified, mascara streaked down her cheeks, met his. "Hold on," Jake shouted, digging his heels into the pavement. The current at both of them, pulling with the strength of a living thing. He could feel her slipping, could see the panic flare in her face. Then the car jerked again, and the current tore her hand free. "Karen." The Bentley spun, slammed into a mailbox, then drifted sideways, crashing into the line of trees at the end of the street. The flood carried it halfway into the creek before it wedged against a trunk. Jake watched breathless as Karen clawed her way up the bank, mud and rain smearing her clothes. She was alive. Soaked, but alive. By dawn, the storm began to die. The water still ran thick and brown through the neighborhood, carrying bits of fencing, flower pots, and garbage bins. Jake stood at the edge of his property, hands on his knees, panting, his body sore and cold. His own driveway was a mess, but his house was dry. The sandbags he'd stacked had held. The barrier that Care ordered removed was gone, but he had rebuilt a smaller wall late last night, just enough to keep the worst of the water out. Across the street, Karen's front yard looked like a disaster zone. Mud was plastered up her front steps. Her flowers were gone. The driveway was cracked, and in the distance, resting awkwardly in a tangle of debris and branches, her beloved Bentley sat half submerged, its gleaming white paint dulled by the filth of the flood. Jake walked over, his boots squelching with every step. Karen stood by the curb, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, staring blankly at the wreckage. She didn't look like the same woman who had barked orders through a clipboard. Her hands were trembling. Her perfect hair was plastered to her face. For once, there was no superiority in her voice. Just shock. Jake stopped a few feet away. The only sound was the faint drip of water from the chound, was the faint drip groan of the flooded car as it settled deeper into the mud. Finally, he broke the silence. "Guess the HOA didn't approve of Mother Nature either. Huh. You." Karen turned her head slowly, eyes red. "You could have warned me," she said, voice hoarse. Jake let out a breath, half a laugh, half disbelief. "I did, Karen. You just didn't want to listen." She looked away, her jaw tightening. But she didn't argue. Not this time. Jake turned, banged light, catching the top of his sandbag wall. Sturdy, ugly, but still standing strong. Behind him, the water lapped quietly around the remains of a car that no rulebook could have saved.